This optical illusion makes it seem like there are bubbles coming up off of the paper. As with the other worksheets, there are steps to create the bubble. I actually used a circular object to make my circle completely round. You don't have to use one, you can just use your hand. But let's say you're having a lot of trouble and you can't quite get the circle. There are some bottle caps you can use for circles and just trace around them. Similar to the bump where we curve our lines, we're going to start by drawing straight lines everywhere but the circle itself. For this particular op art, try not to make your lines too close together. If you can make them as evenly spaced as possible, it will be easier for you to get squares later, but you don't have to get exact measurements. But instead of just going one direction, we're also going to be going the other direction. You can see I actually marked off where I was going to put my lines, so I knew that they would be pretty equal. But again, you don't have to do that. My squares are pretty small. I could have made them bigger than this. Alright, now that I have the grid, I am going to do something very similar to the bump. But instead of going one way, I've now got to go two ways. This is the center point of my circle. You can see I made a mark there. I'm going to curve my lines around it, almost like I'm creating parentheses. Now, the smaller your lines are, the more lines you have to curve. So that's why I mentioned mine have a lot, because this one's going to be a little tricky. It's not just one square I'm bubbling out a couple. So this is my center point. Any line, I'm going to do all of my long lines first. I'm going to bump around the dot. So this is going to curve this way. Alright, I zoomed up. So this first line curved around this way. This one's almost directly in the middle. I think I can probably make it go a little bit to one side. It really doesn't matter if it's in the middle which side you curve it. I'm only curving a little tiny bit because it's right in the center of the bubble. It won't curve a lot. The ones on the side will curve a lot more. So those are the straight lines down. Now I'm going to do the lines going the other way. Same thing, I have one that's almost directly in the middle. If you can help it, it's easier if it's not directly in the middle. But if it is, just curve it very slightly one way or the other. It really doesn't matter. And then the ones on the sides, I'm curving around where the circle is, like parentheses. And for the practice sheet, I'm not going to worry about adding color. I'm just going to practice the shadow, which will be very dark right around where the bubble stops and spread out behind it. I'm going to just pick an area where I want it to be where the light source is coming from. So my light's coming from this direction. So the shadow is going to come from the opposite, go the opposite way. Notice that I'm using curved lines to make the shadow instead of just coloring straight. Makes the shadow look a little more convincing. Just like with the other optical illusion, I'm adding some shadow on the circle itself. We'll make it look more three-dimensional. Just light shadows. And I could probably do a tiny bit on the light side, just so it looks like it's round up front. I now have the final paper. I have a larger circle to help me trace. So I'm using my ruler to measure how far apart I made my line. It's a little over an inch. Remember, the inches are on the bigger side of the paper. Now I'm trying to make sure my measurements look like they are about a square. Same thing, I'm going to find the center point. Very lightly just make a dot for myself. No one else needs to see it. I do have a line that's almost right in the middle, so again I'm going to just lightly curve that line a little bit one way or the other and curve the other ones a little bit more around the dot. So this side's going to go this way. This one's, well, I probably don't even need to make a line there. There's so little space, I could probably just use that line as this line right here. Same thing with this one. If I were to curve this, it would just be hidden in this curve, so I would just leave that too. Now when you color the squares, if just coloring a checker pattern is too easy, you can do what I did with this one, and that is add a border around. So I'll start with a regular square and make the frame. And then I'll skip and do the next one. Now I've come in contact with one of the bubbles, and since it's bubbling out with the other square, I'm not going to color the corner of that square in because it wouldn't be visible. Now on the next row I'll do every other one. And when I come to the bubble, I need to use my imagination. This is part of the square right here. So it will be colored in with this pattern. So since it's curved up, that means my corner of this square will be curved too. And it will be kind of pointed. And if this is too complicated to add in that extra square, just make your squares solid colors. They don't have to have a window inside. So this one is mostly in the bubble. I have to use my imagination. This is a square. I need to make a frame, but the frame is going to follow the curve of the outline. This is the end of the square, so I need it to curve back in and down. Alright, now that my first square is done, I can think about what I'm going to do in my second one. I could do more windows, I could do a solid color. I think I'm going to do the opposite and do a small square of purple inside of a white border. If you're not confident you can make all your squares even, and that would really bug you if they aren't even, you could use a pencil first and draw the squares. And that goes for the frame too, if you want to just use your pencil. Make the square first so you can adjust the square around, or if you're not sure about how it's going to bubble out, it would be a wise idea to use your pencil first. Take a look at it, ask yourself, okay, is that going the same direction? And then when you're happy with it, use the marker to go over the pencil line. When it's finished, use the black color pencil again, decide where you want your light to be coming from. I'm going to have my light coming from this area up top, so my shadow is going to be behind on the opposite side. It will be darkest right next to my bubble, and then as I move away it will get lighter.